Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining another one of our sessions today. It looks like we have yet another packed house. So thank you again. As you know, One Industry, One Choice continues to serve as the most comprehensive dealer and consumer education Bioheat program in the industry. So again, thank you all for the support and feedback over the past 6 months. My name is Brian Peters, Regional Vice President, Consumer Focused Marketing, and today we're going to talk about Bioheat and the solution it presents to the challenges that we're currently facing with electrification. And currently, as it stands, lawmakers and policymakers in New York are doing everything in their power to electrify homes, electrify businesses that currently use heating oil. And really, what we're going to talk about today is the true costs associated with these electrification initiatives and how to really position bioheat fuel as the best renewable energy solution for your customers. So with that said, I want to introduce a good friend of ours, Joe Ugoletto. Joe is the president of Diversified Energy Specialists, and DES is a renewable energy consulting and environmental markets trading company. They trade in thermal portfolio standards in the Northeast, and they serve as an aggregation in the Massachusetts APS, and they represent clients across thermal technologies. So while assisting corporations achieve carbon neutrality, DES is a purchaser of carbon offset credits, and Joe has consulted on various projects for the NBB and NORA on a range of several topics with the common goal of, decarbonizing the heating oil industry. So Joe's recent work has focused specifically on the flaws of the current electrification policy. So with all that being said, I'll turn it over to our friend Joe and give him the floor. And as per previous sessions, you can enter any and all questions in the questions tab on the control panel, all of which will be read and answered at the conclusion of this session. So Joe, I'll flip it over to you and go ahead and take it away.
Thanks, Brian. I appreciate the time and thanks everybody for joining today to hear a little bit about electrification. My presentation will really be based on a study I did on NYSERDA's heat pump program from 2017 to 2019. As Brian mentioned, I work based out of Massachusetts, but work really in the whole Northeast, consulting, kind of trying to expand the use of biodiesel and combat electrification policy, as well as trading in portfolio standards. So with that, jumping into the New York air source heat pump study. Just looking at kind of the basics, so NYSERDA offered an air source heat pump rebate program to all residents from 2017 to 2019. They used nearly $15 million in incentives, and they took those incentives and rebates from the system's benefit charge, which all ratepayers pay on their electricity bill. So from that, they put their data up on their New York data website. So it's publicly available information of what these applications look like. So from all of these applications, they determined that a whole home air source heat pump solution would receive a much larger rebate than others that, you know, if you put a ductless split in a single room of a house, you'd receive a low incentive, but a whole home solution would receive significantly more incentive than others. So looking at kind of what a whole home solution entailed was if it was able to provide more than 90% of the peak heating load of the home, using a calculation that NYSERDA determined, then it would be considered a whole home solution. If it was single zone ducted or centrally ducted, multi-zone all ducted, and multi-zone non-ducted, but includes 2 or more indoor heads, or a multi-zone mix of non-ducted and ducted that includes 2 or more heads. So kind of looking at that, they try to target residential, multifamily, commercial buildings for whole home solutions that they felt would give them the biggest value on the money spent through the program. So kind of looking at how I broke down the data, there was a ton of these applications, and I like to single in on certainly residential homes. So I chose that of all these data points and all these applications, that a home would be qualified for my study as a whole home solution if either the applicant, which in this case was the installer, would fill out the form and report to NYSERDA. If they self-reported that their source heat pump system provided 100% of the home heating load for the square footage, and either NYSERDA qualified the system as a whole home solution, or the incentive they received was equivalent to a whole home solution. So of that, kind of taking a step back here and looking at residential heating fuel in New York and kind of what the markets looked like from 2010 to 2019, you can see that the majority of homes are heated with natural gas, 61%, and that's been growing at over 1% per year. Heating oil heats about 19% of homes as of 2019. It's been declining. It's really the only significant heating technology that has been declining over the last 10 years, and it's been declining significantly. Electricity has been increasing. Electrification initiatives have certainly led to that. Propane has been slightly increasing, but still has a very small percent of the heat load. So looking at the program, so there's about 5,756 applications from single-family detached homes for rebates over the course of these 3 years. The total of all the applications for the program was just under 10,000. My study focused singularly on the single-family detached homes. Of those, I determined over 93% of those were not whole home solutions, and about 6.7% of those were whole home solutions. With that being said, that was about 386 whole home solutions over the course of those 3 years. So I think kind of taking a step back and putting that into perspective, you're talking about 130 homes per year that are converting to air source heat pump systems as whole homes. In the scheme of things, you see states set goals in New England ISO, New York ISO set electrification goals, and they're looking to do hundreds of thousands of homes per year and have over 1 million homes. In New England, at least, ISO New England wants over 1 million homes by 2030 converted to electricity. And you see this data. I did a separate study in Massachusetts, and that data was extremely low as well. You're seeing realistically, consumer behavior-wise, even with these large incentives, people are only converting 100 homes, 150 homes. It's not going to gain traction. So of that, the applications reported the square footage of their conditioned space in their home in buckets. So if it was less than 1,000 square feet, they'd fit in that bucket, 1,000 to 1,500, and so on. So, you see the median reporting is slightly lower than the average size home in New York, but again, putting into perspective how many homes we were dealing with here over a 3-year period, it was 0.005% of residents in New York, residences in New York converted to whole home heat pump system. So that's not really moving the needle much. So now kind of this is, I'd say, the most important slide to understand and look at. So I separated out the cost of conversion of these 386 whole home solutions by their square footage. As you can see, larger the home, the higher the cost of the conversion. But looking at the average square footage of conditioned space estimated, I broke down the bucket. So if it was under 1,000 square feet, I averaged that at 750 square feet. 1,000 to 1,500, I looked at that as 1,250 and averaged that just so I could get at least a feel and an estimate for the square footage of these homes. So I determined the average square footage of conditioned space was just over 1,600 square feet, and the average total cost of conversion was just over $16,000. So it comes out to a little over $10 per square footage. And the average NYSERDA rebate that they gave out for these whole home solutions from the system benefit charges was about $3,651. Kind of scaling that and looking at the median size residence in New York, which is 1,764 square feet. The median residence conversion cost would be just over $17,000. So, if you're looking to switch from whatever technology you have, whether it be heating oil, natural gas, propane, to a air source heat pump system, you're looking at spending at least $17,000 on average to do that. So I think that's significant and certainly telling as it relates to why there are so few conversions. Looking here, I kind of broke down the data a little more. I wanted to show, certainly, in the Massachusetts study I did and in this study in New York, the range was so wide. I think typically with self-reported data, you're going to see a really wide range of numbers coming in. But looking at even the higher end, there's only 9 conversions, whole home conversions of 3,000 or more square feet. And the range is extreme. The low end cost was, the lowest one was $17,437. The highest cost was almost $65,000. So I mean, it's so high cost. And looking at the legacy heat source, the type of fuel they used prior, it's mixed across the board. I think a lot of them were moving from either electric resistance or previous air source heat pump systems to an upgraded system, which I think would lower the average slightly. But that's kind of where it came out. Looking at the legacy heat source, the majority, well, the largest conversion was from oil, then natural gas, electric upgrades, then you'll see propane, wood, and other as well. Kind of understanding where the size homes based on the technology, you'll see it skewed slightly. The smaller homes typically are converting from electric. The larger the home you get, looks more natural gas and oil. But looking at the conversion cost by heat source, I think this chart's really important. There's 111 homes that converted from oil to air source heat pump systems for their whole home, and the average cost of that was almost $19,000. So it seems to, at least from this data, be skewed in the upside. On heating oil, it's going to cost a lot more to convert a heating oil home to air source heat pump system than others. I think that's certainly a benefit to us versus the natural gas homes, which was almost more than $5,000 less on average for pretty much the same number of data points. Looking at the heating system type, it was skewed across the board. I think looking at the self-reported data, there was a ton of unknowns and other reporting in there. So I think this was difficult, but I think the main point I want to make with this slide, and at least with this data, is that so many homes are so different, and whether you have a ducted system, baseboard heating system, central forced air, you'll see the conversion costs skew so much, and why you see such a wide range. For a 1,500 square foot home, you could see a cost of $10,000 or a cost of $55,000 based on how the home's designed, how the heating system's designed. So it's good to take a large bucket of data and find an average, but you could go out to any individual home and come up with a much different number just based on how the home, how the heating system, prior heating system was in place. So I think it's good to at least show there's such a range of heating systems, a range of legacy heat sources, and a range of prices to convert each home. So that was there. Moving on here, so location-wise, so I kind of ran a heat map of where these air source heat pumps were installed. The whole home solutions part of the data source and reporting is they gave a zip code. So looking at it, you'll see very few whole home solutions were put in place in upstate New York. coldest climates, I think it's much more difficult to use air source heat pumps to heat the entire home. In upstate New York, I think just the efficiency, the COP, the cold weather operability issues, you don't see it as much. And then, of course, I think kind of looking at the condensed amount in New York City, typically square footage of residences are much smaller there, and that gives it more of an opportunity to use air source heat pumps to heat the whole home. This map, I thought, it was a pretty interesting one and telling, simply because looking at states that set goals for electrification and heating, is they always talk about how the cost is high, which obviously this study proves, and others, but they believe that not only can it do the job, but it can be equally dispersed given the rebates across all income areas and across all communities. I think here I looked at the median household income by county at the U.S. Census data, and then looked at the counties that had the largest amount of air source heat pump installations for whole home across this study. Typically, the largest numbers happen in the highest income communities. And I think even more than that, you'd see although it's not shown in the data, I think you'll see only the highest income households were installing these systems. So when we talk about climate equity, environmental justice, population, and greenhouse gases, you'll see that these types of programs, rebate programs, are really favoring the high income communities only, with the cost of $16,000, $17,000, $18,000 to install an air source heat pump system. Is a huge barrier to entry for environmental justice populations, and a $3,000, $4,000 rebate might seem like a lot, but still you're going to have to come up with $14,000, $15,000 to put one of these systems in. So I think what I'm seeing in this program and what I'm seeing in Massachusetts and other programs as well is a huge trend that only in the higher income areas are these being put in. And I think, one point to focus on, certainly from our end on the Bioheat side, is that there already is a gap in greenhouse gas emissions between high income and low income communities. All this does is exacerbate that. It widens the gap, and it makes it even more difficult for low income communities to have cleaner air quality and better health. So I think, looking at this kind of, it contradicts their state governments, whether it be New York, Massachusetts, Connecticut. They're looking to tighten the gap on greenhouse gas emissions, and really programs like this are just widening it. And I think every air source heat pump system that's installed in a house, whether it be in a low income or high income community, that's adding to the grid load. It's adding to the greenhouse gas emissions from electricity, and it's adding to the cost of electricity for all ratepayers. So if electrification is successful like they want it to be, and you're installing tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of heat pump systems per year, what that's going to do is significantly increase the cost of electricity, significantly increase the greenhouse gas emissions. And if these are only going into higher income communities, it's going to significantly widen the gap while overburden the lower income populations with higher electricity costs. So I think that's certainly telling, and a really strong argument on our side for now. It's another map looking at another heat map looking at the installations and average installation cost by zip code. Typically, you're seeing the highest cost of installation in New York City, but also spread out otherwise. They're pretty expensive jobs to do. So now looking at the secondary heat source, one of the, I'd say, difficult things with this study was there was no real sufficient data on what happened to the legacy heat source when this whole home solution was installed. So I kind of tried to drill down and narrow out what that really meant. So I think one of the biggest problems when saying a whole home solution can provide, 90% of the peak heating load, it might be able to do that on paper, but there's no way to say whether that's actually occurring. There's been plenty of situations, in one being the ICE New England 2020 heating electrification report. They did an AMI study of 18 homes in northern Massachusetts, and they studied the electrical output hourly over the course of an entire winter of 18 homes that had natural gas or heating oil. Then the next winter, they put in air source heat pump systems that have the capacity to heat the whole home and measured the electrical output hourly from those homes as well. And it turned out that all 18 used the heat pump systems for less than 50% of their annual heat load. Their legacy heat source of natural gas or heating oil stayed in place, and they were still used all winter. So even though these installations might have the capacity to heat a home, they're not, most homeowners and consumer behavior is showing that they're not actually using them to heat their home. So I think, one of the biggest problems with these studies is you can say it's a whole home conversion, but you don't remove the legacy heat source and you don't actually use what you put in for heat. You could just be putting in great air conditioning systems that are being used for air conditioning and providing a rebate on the basis that you're providing the rebate for a heating system, which isn't, again, being used. So looking at this data, I kind of drilled down and said 55 self-reported that the air source heat pump systems did not provide 100% of their household's annual heat load, despite NYSERDA stating that it was a whole home solution. 81 were determined not to be whole home solutions by NYSERDA, but were self-reported to be whole home solutions. 69 self-reported having another fuel type, and 8 self-reported having another primary heating system. So in the end, that kind of all that data washed up into 166 of the 386 homes that installed the whole home solution used another heating fuel for at least a portion of their annual heat load. The remaining didn't indicate whether a heat source was used, but we can definitively state that at least 45% of them had a second heat load. So despite the definition of a whole home solution providing 90% or more of the system's heating load, the majority, well, almost half of them we know for sure didn't actually only have heat pump systems providing their heat load. I think one of the important things when NYSERDA and other, whether it's state government or utility run rebate programs, should look at in the future when deciding how to allocate these system benefit charges that all ratepayers are paying as incentives. If they're going to try to electrify everything, they would need to mandate the removal of the legacy heat source, and at some level, to at least some kind of field study, meter air source heat pump system usage. Because I think all of the field studies that have been done have come back with data that seems a little shaky and confusing of whether these systems are actually being used to provide 100% of the home's heat load. So in the Massachusetts study I did, there was much more definitive data on whether there was a supplementary heat source used in the home. There was a specific question on it, and I wanted to just show the results from that study to kind of show the secondary heat source and what a whole home solution really is. So Massachusetts Clean Energy Center provided an air source heat pump rebate program from 2014 to 2019. So over a 5-year period, and about 622 of those I determined to be whole home solutions. Of those, almost 93% reported having a supplementary heat source that they use for at least a partial amount of their annual heat load. Of that, you can see what the legacy heat sources were that were kept as supplementary heat sources. Small percentage, about a quarter, was electric resistance, and the rest, was natural gas, oil, propane. So despite the claim of whole home conversions based on calculations, capacity, the actual use of these systems, it's being self-reported that they're not actual whole home solutions, and they're not actually being used in the winter to heat their homes. So looking at the ISO New England 2020 heating electrification that I mentioned before, and other field studies here, it's clear that despite all of the installations that are forecasted and the slight grid load forecast and everything else, politicians and environmental groups are kind of basing their electrification future studies on what's happening in the field right now. And I think what's happening in the field right now is you're looking at whole home solutions or claimed whole home solutions, and they're not actually adding a significant load to the grid, and they're not actually adding a significant load to the winter peak. The reason for that is they're not being used in the winter, they're being used as air conditioning systems. So you're seeing environmental groups, ISO New England, ISO New York, and others project grid load increases from air source heat pump installations in home as much smaller than they really should be. Because of that, they look at the capacity they'll need to reach 100% renewable electricity in the future is much smaller than they actually will need. So I think that is a good thing for our industry, but it's something to certainly point out as we move forward. So looking at the data from NYSERDA again, and looking at were these retrofits or new build construction, because I think there's a very strong correlation between those two, price and effectiveness of the system. Only 22 of the 386 reported to be having their air conditioning installed after 2011. So then we can assume that at least 95% of these 386 reported homes were retrofit construction. So that was important to point out, that this is almost all retrofits and very few new builds. So I think looking at the data, I included all 386 that I included as full home solutions. I didn't remove any outliers. And there were a significant amount of outliers that could have been removed that would have increased the average cost. So I kind of gave a few examples here. There was about 23 outliers that really could have or should have been excluded, but I wanted to keep them in there and make sure that none of the data could be questioned really in any way. But so, a few examples: a home that reported being, 1,000 to 1,500 square feet, said converting their whole home cost $3,200. They received a $3,000 rebate from NYSERDA. Said it would provide 100% of their square feet. NYSERDA said it was a whole home solution. They had natural gas prior. They used baseboard heat, and the building was built between 1941 and 1950. Simply to me, a $200 upgrade, I certainly would question that when other homes in the same category are reporting, 20 or 30,000 for the conversion. Same deal with an outlier example number two, 1,500 to 2,000 square feet. They claimed it was a 4,500 job to convert their whole home. They used heating oil before, and then the home was built between 1981 and 1990. Significantly low data from everything else we've seen. The third one, 2,500 to 3,000 square foot home, significantly higher, larger than the average. Claimed the total project cost was $6,700, and they received over $5,000 in a rebate. They had propane prior to. So I wanted to make clear that I left all of these in the data set, and they did significantly bring down the numbers for these heat pump conversions, but I just felt it was important to keep the integrity of the data and leave them in there, but at least point them out. So then now I wanted to point on some of the applications that I excluded from the data set that were quite high. So if they didn't receive a full load incentive or report that they provided 100% of heat load, and NYSERDA didn't say that they were a whole home solution, they were excluded from this data set. But some of the data was certainly telling, although it couldn't be included in this. I think, for, example number one, it cost over $21,000 to heat 50% of a home that was less than 1,000 square feet. I mean, that's significant, extremely significant. In example two, it costs over $22,000 to heat 25% of a home that was between 1,000 and 1,500 square feet. Example number three, cost $37,000 to heat 50% of a home that was 1,500 to 2,000 square feet. Example three, home was 2,500 to 3,000 square feet. The air source heat pump system installed had the capability to heat about 85% of the home, and it cost them over $39,000 to install the system. In the next one, $30,000 to heat 40% of a home that was 2,500 to 3,000 square feet. And in the last one, cost about $42,000 to heat 65% of a home that was between 3,000 and 4,000 square feet. So I think these numbers are pretty telling of the true costs behind electrification. And in these examples, they're providing less than 100% of the heat load. It's not the whole home converted, and they're self-reporting that it doesn't have the capacity to heat a whole home, but you're talking about $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 for these installations, and it's significant. So I think this is the most important slide in the deck, and something that I'm certainly going to work on going forward, and something Rich Sweetser over at NORA, who's brilliant, is putting together a model based on kind of the cost of converting to electricity and the cost of carbon reduction. So in this study, I simply looked at what was the cost per ton of carbon dioxide and greenhouse gas savings for a whole home conversion at the homeowner level only. So not looking at any infrastructure changes, anything on any end, simply looking at the homeowner cost for the reduction. So for these 386 whole home conversions, on average, it costs nearly $2,000 per ton of CO2 savings. So that number's crazy, right? It's really makes you question, why are these programs even in place, and how is this even a solution to climate change? And so, just comparatively, the Biden administration put together a council to come out with the social cost of carbon and kind of put a number on how much damage a metric ton of carbon dioxide emitted today will do in the future. They wanted to do this to show how much a given climate policy would benefit the economy in the long run. So I figured that's a really great measurement to see, well, what would this policy benefit our economy in the long run with carbon dioxide reduction. So they are preliminary numbers. They came out and released and said, $51 per ton of CO2 reduced is how they feel the social cost of carbon should be priced at. So with that being said, as you can see in the middle bar there, it's slightly different than this cost, and this cost is only at the homeowner level. So you have to question if they're going to use that measure of $51 being the social cost, and that's how you measure how effective a policy is. Well, this policy isn't very effective at all. It's actually counterproductive. Looking at RGGI, Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, it's a cap and invest program for the power sector that looks at reducing CO2 with renewable energy, renewable electricity generation. That's currently priced at $7.97 per ton of CO2 reduced. So looking at those numbers specifically, these air source heat pump rebate programs, the money's coming from every ratepayer in the state. It's given to only the people who can afford these installations, And the cost of these programs far outweighs the climate benefit of these conversions. So I think this is something that I know Rich Sweets is working on and others, and this is something that we'll need a deeper dive into because it really highlights the problem with these programs and electrification policy across the board. So kind of what I looked at is takeaways from this study. Just the sheer number of whole home conversions is so low. I mean, 0.005% of residents is converted over a 3-year period in New York. And not only that, I think what a true conversion really means versus what they determined it to be in this study are two very different things. You can look at census data and say, oh, okay, 15% of homes in the Northeast are using electricity to heat their homes. But at the same time, they still have a heating oil or natural gas system in place when they installed these air source heat pump systems, and they might only be using these air source heat pump systems to cool their home. So you really do have to question that. And then, the consumer behavior and why they're not using it. I mean, the cost of electricity is the highest in winter. And not only that, there are operability issues when it gets really cold, especially, upstate New York, all of northern New England. Operability still remains a question. And, personally in the APS program, I work with homeowners that put in air source heat pump systems, ground source heat pump systems, and others. But the installers that install these air source heat pump systems are recommending to the homeowners that are installing these systems to keep their legacy heat source if they want to stay warm in the winter, because they're going to have problems operability wise. Another takeaway, obviously, these are extremely expensive systems and they increase the grid load winter peak load. So that increases the cost of electricity for all ratepayers. And as states like New York, Connecticut, Massachusetts set 100% renewable electricity goals in 2040, 2050, right now you could say, in ISO New England, the peak load is in the winter is around 22,000 megawatts is what you're seeing at the peak. Well, the more heat pumps you install, the more you're going to increase the winter peak. The more you're going to push the goalpost down the road and say, well, now you need, X amount more of renewable electricity generation to meet net zero, because you're simply adding to the grid load. And so I think that's, one of the real important things of biodiesel is not only can we reduce carbon emissions efficiently and cost effectively, but we can actually help remove load from the grid and help them reach their renewable electricity goals. So kind of taking a step back and looking at how Bioheat fits into all this in kind of the competition in the heating industry in the Northeast. I mean, the heating oil, which has biodiesel, and the Bioheat industry has the ability to drastically reduce its carbon intensity over time. That's more than that can be said of natural gas and propane. Propane and natural gas. Natural gas has, RNG, but it's very limited supply currently, and to think that they'll be able to scale it at any rate, especially with the amount of natural gas being used for electricity, it's really tough. I mean, the highest projection I've seen is 25% of the gas supply will be renewable natural gas by 2050. So, at scale, natural gas and propane cannot reduce their carbon score. We can, and electricity obviously can over time, but as they add more air source heat pumps, they're increasing their grid load, makes it a lot more difficult to lower the heat load. This last slide here, just looking specifically at Bioheat versus cold climate heat pumps. I think it's important to know, everybody looks at the pricing of Bioheat as more than cold climate heat pumps, but as we put in, if you factor in one, the conversion cost, and two, look at the more load you put on the grid, the higher cost of electricity over time, that may change. Conversion cost, obviously, Bioheat's a drop-in fuel for anyone that has a heating oil system already in place, and significant high costs to air source heat pump systems. Carbon pricing, Bioheat can obviously offset carbon pricing if that were to go into place at any point in time down the road. Storage, it's important that, as homeowners, to know you have 15 days of storage in your tank. It is really important in cold winter months. Unlike electricity, you have a Texas situation happen, there's rolling blackouts at 0 degrees outside and you're freezing. It's a difficult situation, I think. The potential for greenhouse gas reduction, Bioheat reduces greenhouse gases today. Cold climate air source heat pump systems, they can reduce electricity over time after substantial capital investment and construction projects. But the value of reducing greenhouse gases today is much more valuable than reducing them tomorrow. In addition, when you talk about scalability of reduction, one heating oil dealer now can start blending a B10 and delivering to their 5,000 or so customers tomorrow and reducing greenhouse gases in all of those homes. To reduce greenhouse gases with air source heat pump systems, it's going to take a construction project, a significant capital investment, and just the cost benefit is so strong there on the Bioheat side. The reliability, obviously, if you want to live in a comfortable, fully heated home at all times, Bioheat's obviously the answer. Cold climate heat pumps still have questions about their operability in very cold temperatures and typically need a supplementary heat source. The reason I think we've seen electrification policy so strong is simply because, one, they have a unified and clear message. We're going to lower the carbon intensity of electricity because every solar panel and wind farm you see, that is electricity generation. Therefore, that will supply 100% of our electricity, and that's where we're going. And it's an extremely consolidated industry with very few extremely large players with deep pockets that are able to market this to politicians, to end users, etc. I think the heating oil industry is obviously extremely fragmented and makes it a little more difficult to have our message reach. Plus, we have consistently thought of as a fossil fuel for the last 100 years. It's tough to change the tool to know we're the bioheat industry, we're renewable liquid fuels industry, we're the answer, and we can do it for low-income communities at no cost. We can do it for all homeowners, and I think that's really important. With that, if there are any questions that came in during the course of the chat or anything else, I'd be happy to take a few minutes and answer those now.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. We have a couple of questions that we can kind of run through here as sort of a rapid fire type deal. The first question that came in, can you hear me okay?
Yes, yep.
Okay, do you have an opinion as to why the number of heat pump conversions is so low? Is there a workforce issue at play, or are the utilities simply doing a poor job of convincing homeowners to switch?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a little bit of both. I think in New York, NYSERDA has a program where they're trying to bring on more installers of these heat pump systems, and I think there is some pushback, at least from installers that I've spoken to, of the reliability of these systems. As far as the speed of conversions, why it is so low, I think the extremely high barrier to entry as of the cost is the most significant factor. I mean, to ask the average homeowner to drop $20,000 on a system, and then, by the way, keep your heating oil system or natural gas system in place if you need it for when it gets really cold, it's a tough sales pitch. And I think you're just simply seeing low adoption despite the push. As far as marketing goes, it's tough to say. I think certainly the utilities are and will continue to put a ton of money into marketing, and you'll see that ramp up over time. But at the end of the day, we have a competitive message, and I think we actually have a competitive advantage for what we're offering, especially in this political climate. So I think, we definitely can and will compete.
Great. Another question that came in, if bio becomes more expensive than standard heating oil, let's say 10 cents or 20 cents more, in your mind, do you think that bio can actually compete with heat pumps as a choice for home heat?
Absolutely. If bio went to $1 above heating oil, and I don't believe it will anytime soon, but let's say it did, I still think it would be competitive. I think the value of reducing carbon is significantly more than anything else. And I don't think we will be at a point in time where the dealers won't have a choice anyway, despite the cost of it. I think the value of reducing carbon is far higher, and I think if you just continue to deliver heating oil, you get legislated out of business eventually. In some states sooner than others, but I certainly think that day is coming. But no matter what the cost of biodiesel is versus heating oil, I think there's extreme benefit to blending it, and whether that's on the marketing side, politically as well. Heat pumps have such a high upfront cost, and we have such a huge price advantage in the sense of the cost to reduce carbon that, bio could be $1 above of heat, and it would still cost the homeowner less to reduce carbon than installing an air source heat pump system.
Okay, thank you. What fuels are keeping the grid alive now? Something we should all consider in the industry. Natural gas, coal, distillate, all three? What do you think?
It depends where. ISO New England, ISO New York, certainly there are renewables on the grid. There's coal, sometimes slightly, heating oil, natural gas. ISO New England's mainly natural gas. ISO New York, mainly natural gas. In ISO New England, you're seeing over 60% of the electric load serviced by natural gas. I think it's important to differentiate between what the average load from the year is, which is typically a talking point of utilities and politicians, and what is being used in the winter and at peak times to provide the grid load. So electricity generation in the winter at peak loads in ISO New England, ISO New York is typically natural gas. You're going to see a slight amount of heating oil and a slight amount of coal. You'll see a slight amount of renewables. We'll call those cross-canceling. In the end, it's natural gas. So what is being used to heat homes in the winter when you want to turn your cold climate air source heat pump on in the entire Northeast right now is natural gas.
Perfect, thank you. And two more here. How unstable do you believe the electrical grid is currently, and could they even accommodate homes converting to heat pumps?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think it was interesting in the Connecticut Integrated Resources Plan, which they kind of outlined their electric plan to 2040 and how they plan to get to net zero. One of the comments they made, and it was in their 376-page document, they put this on page 340, was that the transmission lines in the grid in New England, as is in ISO New England, will not be able to sustain any more renewable electricity until there is a completely revamp of every transmission line in New England. I think as far as getting into kind of the technical aspects of it, there will need to be significant investment into the infrastructure of electricity in order to carry a larger percentage of renewables, transmit them to your home and everything else. I think as far as how stable it is, it's tough to say. I'd say right now it might be stable, but the more renewables you add to the grid, the more unstable it will become without significant investments. I think it's undervalued how much money will have to be put into the infrastructure of electricity to reach higher levels of renewable electricity generation.
Gotcha. And then that last slide, do you have a one-pager listing the benefits of bio versus the cold climate heat pumps available? I think our customers, employees, and general consumers need to know about this.
Yes, yeah, I'm putting that together now. Just a quick, brief one-page infographic that shows the benefits of Bioheat versus electrification. Just kind of a few, high-level bullet points that everybody could read and understand. And I'll make sure to circulate that probably by the end of the week when I finish that up.
Great. And I think one more came in about as it relates to the grid. Somebody had said, are you taking into consideration the net efficiency of power plants? Most power plants operate at 35%.
Yes, yeah, it's really important to know. Certainly in the winter, whenever you get to peaking, they're turning on the steam facilities. They're turning on other facilities that are extremely inefficient. They're older, extremely inefficient compared to simply what we do with Bioheat and the efficiency that we operate at. So the colder it gets, the less efficient electricity gets. Some of the power plants are extremely inefficient. As you ramp up with renewables, efficiency and intermittency of those are extremely low as well. So definitely a good point and extremely important to consider.
Great. And the last one here, Ron Katorba wanted me to pass along and said, Joe, fantastic presentation. You make a compelling case and hit all the important points. Thank you so very much for this. We greatly appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Ron. I appreciate it. Happy to help.
Well, great. So I think that pretty much wraps it up. If there's no more questions coming in, so thank you again. Thank you most importantly to Joe. Thank you everyone for the participation. With this session, with all the others, many of you on the dealer side have been getting in touch after these sessions take place. So don't be shy. Continue to reach out. We'll continue to connect you with the appropriate personnel. And again, we appreciate the continued feedback. Just a reminder, our next session will be on August 18th at 12:15. And that will focus primarily on the results of our Hudson Valley and Upstate New York Bioheat focus groups. Links will be going out for that in the next week or so. So again, I want to thank everybody who participated today. Joe, I want to thank you again, and we're looking forward to hearing from everyone after we depart. So thank you, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your week.
Thank you.